Alright. Welcome to Sideboard MTG. My name's Eric, and it's time for our weekly vlog. Let's talk MTG. Wow, that's a lot of MTG, right? That's what we do here on this channel. It's a lot of MTG, and this week we're talking about 4 new decks that are not exactly new, but they're going to hit our standard meta, and it's going to increase the amount of play on these decks. So it's definitely something that we need to talk about, and talk about how this is going to affect standard. So if you do like today's show, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and if you like the content in general, subscribe to the channel. Now, there's a notification bell there. You're going to want to hit that, because I'm going to be running a league this week with each of these decks. Unaltered competitive league to see just how well they stand up in the meta as printed. As Wizards has, delivered the product, how well does the product stand up? And during each of those leagues, we're going to be talking about the upgrades and how you can take these fresh products and take them all the way to a tier 2, tier 1.5, or even a tier 1 deck, depending on which one of these boxes you pick up. Now, I believe all of the decks have an upgrade available to them that could make them 100% Friday night competitors. And there are some upgrades available to them that could make them Pro Tour competitors, and we've already seen that with the Hazoret Aggro, the Counter Surge deck. We have seen Vehicle Rush at the top of the top 8 deck lists here recently, and quite a bit of Rivals of Ixalan's tournaments. In professional events, we've seen all of these decks, kind of except for the blue-white approach deck. Since Rivals of Ixalan's came out, we haven't seen a lot from blue-white approach, so that's where we're at on the 4 decks. There are upgrades available to them. Let's break these decks down. Let's talk about these decks, and we'll kind of go from there. Thank you, everyone, for coming out to my weekly vlog. Man, I like these. We kind of get to talk about these decks. And first off, I'm a little bit hurt that this first deck that I've got pulled up for you guys here, Counter Surge, I'm just hurt that one card's not in here. I believe there should have been at least 1 copy of Blooming Marsh in the deck. I mean, they could have went, 4 Foul Orchards and 1 Blooming Marsh. Come on. Come on, Wizards. I know you put a lot of value in these decks. Each of these decks right now in paper equal somewhere between 75 and 90 bucks. It's kind of teeter-tottering, as card prices fluctuate a little bit. And right before these cards hit, I assume that the prices are going to drop a little bit. But a $30 deck that has $90 worth of value in it, that's pretty good. I mean, these decks are built to have that tier 1 curve, so any of these decks could curve out just like the tier 1 counterparts do. Take, for example, with this deck, you could turn to Glint Sleeve Siphoner with the energy to draw a card on 3, like that's available. You could just Foul Orchard into Aether Hub, Glint Sleeve Siphoner, you've got 2 energy. That's a really good play. You could simply just play, Forest Swamp into a Winding Constrictor, followed up with a Rishkar. So, I mean, that's a really good curve. There's Gontis in this deck. The deck even has some Verdurous Gearhulks. And when I say some, I actually mean 3. There are 3 Verdurous Gearhulks in this deck, and there's a Walking Ballista. I don't know if you guys know it or not, but Walking Ballista is not actually a cheap card. So, yay, this is really exciting for me. The fact that so many of these, $4 and $5 cards and $6 cards are actually in these decks. Now, yeah, there are a lot of cheap cards, but I mean, you have cards like Glint Sleeve Siphoner that are $2 and $3 a piece right now. Followed along with $7 and $8 Walking Ballistas. And even though there's a single Walking Ballista in this particular deck, I don't think that the price of Walking Ballista is just going to tank that much, because it does get some modern play. It it sees some combo play, and things that can produce a lot of mana. There's a lot of call for Walking Ballista, and a lot of people actually want the card. So I don't really think that the value of some of these cards is going to drop a lot. But it might. I mean, I expect some drop off on these, but For cards like Walking Ballista in particular, where this deck, if you were to upgrade it, would want 3 more copies of Walking Ballista, it might actually increase the value of Walking Ballista, as people might want to upgrade this deck. And since they can get the majority of the deck for $30 and then spend, another $30 to upgrade the deck, that's where I want to be. $60 to get into Standard and have a competitive chance. Thank you, Wizards. Like, should I just retitle this entire show? Thank you, Wizards. Maybe I will. Either way, this particular deck, it has a lot of power here. Yes, as far as the deck goes, there are a couple cards that I would definitely change out. Walk the Plank, and there's only one Fatal Push in here. I don't necessarily know if I want Scrap Heap Scrounger in the deck. Dream Stealer, maybe that's not exactly the card you want in the deck. But, that leaves a lot of room for other cards. Now, they do have, good answers or good substitutes for some of the other cards. Like, take, for example, Vraska's Contempt is normally run in the Green-Black Constrictor list. Well, they don't have a Vraska's Contempt in here, but they do have Hour of Glory, which gives the deck a really good answer for the Scarab God. And it wouldn't be hard to actually splash blue in this deck and start running your own The Scarab Gods. So, we are going to talk about that a little bit, but most of the upgrades for these decks I will go over during the league in which I cover these decks. And I am going to mention a little bit the different directions you could go with the upgrades tonight. But again, we will talk about those in depth when it comes time to run each of these decks. For me, you could take this deck either into Sultai if you wanted to go into a 3-color deck, or you could take this deck into just the Green-Black Constrictor list and, run it just as pure of a Constrictor list as you could. And yeah, you would be adding a little bit more value to it as Vraska's Contempts, or Vraska's Contempts are about $12 a piece right now. So adding 3 Vraska's Contempts to the deck would make it quite a bit more expensive. So there is a lot of room for upgrade there. If you want to get the Green-Black lands, you are looking at about $60 to $70 to completely upgrade this deck. So again, buying this as your base and then starting to upgrade, add a piece here, add a piece there. I know a lot of people are talking about, oh, but these are going to rotate and things like that. They don't rotate until October, so you've got about 6 months worth of play with these decks. And if you only added, $10 or $15 to the deck every week or so, then you're going to be there, and within about a month you're going to have this deck upgraded. If you were able to pick up one of the other decks, you might actually get some pieces to upgrade from there. I highly recommend that if somebody was completely new to Standard, this is going to be a great place to start. So again, a thank you, Wizards, on this one. I really like what they've done here. Yes, these are some decks that have been out for a little while, and nothing's really innovative about these decks. More or less, they're just strictly better versions of them currently in our meta, and I think that's actually good. I think that's where Wizards wanted to be with these challenger decks. Hey, I'm somebody that wants to play, Standard, but I'm not going to go drop $300 on a deck, but I do have this $30 challenger deck that I was able to drop an extra 40, 50 bucks on, and now I've got a really competitive deck. Granted, if you wanted to drop even more into this deck, you could start adding, some $30 and $40 Scarab Gods. You could, add another, $30, $40 to the land base. You could bump this thing up to a Sultai, and then you could stick a lot of money into it. However, you could stick just a little bit into it and still have a very competitive deck. Now, this deck is the one deck that I say is probably the most ill-suited in our current meta. In a vacuum, it could be the most powerful deck that was printed. However, in our meta with all the targeted removal, this deck, it worries me a little bit. However, there are 4 copies of Blossoming Defense, and this is something we haven't seen a lot of Constrictor do here lately. Constrictor has been kind of laying off of... Thank you for subscribing. I don't have a name for it. But we do have We do have 4 Blossoming Defense, and that's not something we've seen so much of lately in the Constrictor decks, and I'm kind of happy to see it back here. I don't necessarily know if I like 25 lands in this deck. Maybe 24 would do the trick, especially when you got things like Rishkar. But for the most part, the deck's just a solid deck. Let's take a look at the sideboard here before we move on. We've got a couple Life Grafters Bestiaries. We've got Appetite for the Unnatural, Dispossess. There's a couple cartouches in here, gives you a little bit of lifelink. Die Young, these are answers to for indestructible creatures like Hazoret. So if you don't have your Hour of Glory, or you don't hit your Hour of Glory, you can make do with Die Young and a couple triggers from maybe a Glint Sleeve Siphoner or something. Again, this doesn't actually have a tune, and I assume that the Foul Orchards used to be a tune when they were first being developed, but of course that was removed from our meta, so it makes sense that it would not be in this particular deck. 4 copies of Duress. Again, if you were going to splash into blue, you could probably start sliding Negate in here somewhere, and then a singleton copy of Slice and Twain. I don't think you actually need the Slice and Twain when you have the Appetite for the Unnatural, but hey, I like drawing cards, and this will let you draw cards, and it's instant speed, but again, so is Appetite for the Unnatural. There's arguments for both. Again, I'm not going to break down where I think there's construction issues, because there's just a flat out tier 1 version of this deck, or a tier 1.5 version of this deck floating around. So we could take it for a direct upgrade, but there's a lot of value here in this deck, and for the most part, it's pretty well built. You've got good answers for control. You've got good answers for most of the gods, like Hazoret. If you're coming up against a red deck, you can easily add a little bit more power. Plus, the cartouche is easy. Can easily kill or weaken other creatures. Including putting a neg 1/1 counter on Hazoret could make Hazoret small enough that you can block him every turn from that point. And if you can swing into Hazoret because you've been able to make him just slightly smaller than your Winding Constrictor or something, and you have lifelink, then you're probably going to win that fight. So, I really like, Cartouche in here. It seems like they did put enough answers in here to at least fight the other 3 decks. And the other 3 decks are all a part of the meta, so that's kind of what I'm going to be looking at in the sideboards is, do the sideboards at least have the answers to fight the other 3 decks? Because I do believe that all 4 of these decks are going to get an increase in play, because it's going to be really easy for new deck builders or new brewers to just grab these products as a base and then start building around them. So you might see a lot of different versions of Green-Black Constrictor or Constrictor decks show up, even more so than normal, because people can get these well-built bases for their deck building. And there's some cards that you might want to remove, like Long Tusk Cub or something like that. There's just a little extra room there, as these cards just aren't as good now that we lost the precursor and the follow-up to Long Tusk Cub in Attune with Aether and Rogue Refiner. So maybe we could cut some cards and increase our odds a little bit, and again, we'll talk about that when we run the deck. So that is the Counter Surge deck. Next, let's talk about Hazoret Aggro. Red deck wins, 30 bucks. Out of the box, probably one of the most competitive versions of the Challenger decks that we have. This deck doesn't need a whole lot. Now, there are certain matchups where you're going to take a couple of your Hazorets out, you're going to bring a Chandra in, you're going to bring a Glorybringer in, you're going to have that higher curve. The main part about this deck is the land base does not need to be fixed. The land base is, for the most part, perfect, and you could probably even shave a single land to add in a little bit more something if you wanted to. But you could also just run it at 24 lands and never really have a problem, getting to your mana. The one card in this deck that I would like to see added would be Earthshaker Kenra, and that's kind of the only card really missing from the deck. I would just drop the Harsh Mentors and probably a Magma Spray from the main board, or the Harsh Mentors and 1 land for 4 Earthshaker Kenras, and then this deck's pretty much ready to go. And then as you get money, you could add the extra Hazorets. But yeah, this deck can curve out like any other deck. Or any other red deck except for the Earthshaker Kinras. So again, if you could get the Kinras, then you're ready to go there. Also, this deck would be very easy to splash into white and run a Path of Metal deck. I think that a Path of Metal deck would fit really well in here. You could easily drop out the Harsh Mentor, slide in 3 Path of Metals, and get you some red-white split lands, and then you would have a Path of Metal deck. And you wouldn't necessarily need the extra Hazarets and things like that. So real easy to shift into a couple decks from here. I guess we're still showing the walk the plank there. The Harsh Mentor, this is kind of the open spot. Like normally we don't see the Harsh Mentor or the main board Magma Sprays, and I would probably shave 1 land, go down to 23 lands. You don't necessarily have to do that. Run 24 if you feel more comfortable with it, but the Magma Sprays, if Mardu Vehicles is continues getting play, Magma Spray may be where you want to be. As you start adding more hazards to the deck, you're going to want to remove cards that you can't just get rid of in a control matchup, like a Braid or Magma Spray. You're going to want to get those out of your hand. So that when you play your Hazoret, you can swing with it. You don't want to get trapped with those in hand. So that's going to open up your spot for your Earthshaker Kinras and stuff. But for the most part here, we have a standard red deck wins. Fanatical Firebrand, Soulscar Mage, 4 Bomat Couriers, 4 Lightning Strikes, 3 Kari Zevs. The Harsh Mentors, again, there's your spot. 2 Braids, that's kind of common in the red decks right now. 4 On-Crop Crashers, a Chandra, a Hazoret, and then that's right, a singleton copy of Glorybringer. So the main board of the deck is pretty much ready to go and could easily curve out and just destroy someone. So if your deck chokes, this deck doesn't need an upgrade to be able to just run over you. So in the sideboard, yeah, the sideboard's probably going to need a little bit of work. The Pia Nalars, I like Pia. Pia Nalar in the deck is just great. We've got 4 copies of Chandra's Defeat, so there's a lot of red decks out there, a lot of Glorybringers and things like that. You might want to bring this in against like Grixis so you can kill Chandras or things like that. You can even deal 5 damage to Bolas with Chandra's Defeat. A lot of people don't think about that, but this will kill Angrath. Angrath comes down, ticks up, he's at 5. You can hit him with Chandra's Defeat and kill Angrath. So Chandra's Defeat, really good card. And a 4 of them makes sense in here. The other 2 Magma Sprays, if you run up against Mardu Vehicles and you've got 4 copies of Magma Spray, you're about to be sitting in a really good spot. That's exactly where you want to be, especially with a couple of Braids in the main board and you're aggressive at that. Yeah, that's exactly where I want to be. Key to the City, this might actually look a little out of place, but this will help your Hazoret get through. It helps you discard cards. So you can bring this in, and then if you have cards trapped in your hand, you can just kind of pitch those away. So I really like Key to the City. Sentinel Totem, this is really cheap, but personally, if you are curving out every turn, then Sentinel Totem may be the best piece of artifact or graveyard removal for the deck. I personally think that you could also slide in a Scavenger Grounds into the graveyard, but 3 Sentinel Totems here, that gives this a lot of game against the Scarab God decks and things like that. So I like the Sentinel Totem here. And then a couple copies of Kari Zev's Expertise, so we can take their Torrential Gearhulk or the Scarab God and crack back at them with it. Pia Nalar, so we can help build up that wall. Man, the deck's got all of the answers that you need to fight the other decks, and that's kind of what I was wanting to see out of these decks. I like it. I like where the deck's going, and again, I don't think that it would take a whole lot of money to get this upgraded to its Tier 1 counterpart. And again, this one does have a Tier 1 to Tier 1.5 counterpart. We've been seeing red deck in all of the top 8s recently, even though it has faded a little bit in this past week, and it may continue to fade as more lifelink decks or life gain decks come around. But for the most part, red deck is still here, and red deck does win from time to time. So this deck, it's ready to go. If you were going to grab any of these boxes and take it to F&M, this would be the first one I'd say, you know what, grab it. It's probably going to give you your most competitive edge. The next one on the list after that would actually be Vehicle Rush. Now, again, in a vacuum, I actually think that the Counter Surge would be the most powerful of the decks, but in our current meta, because we have Grixis mid-range floating around, I don't think that the green-black deck is the most powerful in our meta. Might be the most powerful of the decks, but not in our meta. And that is a huge statement and a big deal. So the next one here we have here is the Vehicle Rush deck. Now, as far as deck construction goes, not talking about the mana base, this deck is probably the most complete. The red deck is really close to complete, but there's only like 2 cards other than lands that you need to change in this deck to be running the current tier 1 version of this deck. And other than that, you would want to fix the lands a little bit. There are some expensive lands. Concealed Courtyard's not a cheap card. Dragon Skull Summit, it's worth a couple bucks. And Aspiring Vantage is worth a couple bucks. And you could easily slide those in their place here. Wizards has, kind of done us a favor. They've thrown the Unclaimed Territories in. Now, that's going to bring the price on Unclaimed Territory down a little bit, and it is getting a lot of modern play, so I do like, that this will be a little bit cheaper, so, those of you that are trying to build your 5-color humans and things like that for modern, this will drop the price on that, as all of these prices are going to drop a little bit, and it'll make these cards a little bit more affordable and put more of those into, a reachable area for most of us. And that's going to be great when you have these $80 decks that are being presented to you for $30. That's really going to cut the value of some of these cards. And for us as standard players who once a year lose a major portion of our collection, every time that we get a chance to keep a couple cards, that's great for us. And that's that's pretty cool, man. I'm actually really, again, thank you, Wizards. So let's take a look at this deck. Again, we've got the 4 Bomat Couriers, 4 Toolcraft Exemplar, 4 Scrap Heap Scroungers, 4 Heart of Kieran. That's right, guys. 4 Heart of Kierans here. That's right. Dad's car is going to be cruising. Next, we've got 4 Veteran Motorists, 4 Lightning Strike, 4 Unlicensed Disintegration, 2 PNLR, 3 Depala, and then here's the 2 cards, like, maybe you want to take the Cultivator's Caravan out, maybe you don't want to take the Cultivator's Caravan out. I think this is probably, one of the free spots that you could make some, you could play around with a little bit. Personally, we see Glorybringer in some of these decks. I think that the Sky Sovereign Consul Flagship fits really well here. I even like the Cultivator's Caravan because it's a 5/5. But honestly, I would just want it to be another Aether Sphere Harvester. Honestly, like that's where I'd want to be with it. So that's the main board. It's pretty much exactly like the Mardu Vehicles decks that we're seeing right now, or the Dwarves Vehicles decks. Again, this is one of the decks that you could use to kind of like if you say you bought maybe this deck and the red deck, it would help you like bridge a gap to create a whole nother deck. And that would be the red-black aggro or the black-red aggro, depending on if there would be a couple extra cards you would need to get. But let's say you went out and bought all 4 of these decks. There's a couple other decks that are just not being mentioned here, in these 4, like the red-black aggro deck or the mono-black aggro deck that runs 4 Heart of Kierans, and then the rest of the deck is like $5. So picking up one of these could really push you into the red-black aggro or the black-red aggro or mono-black aggro with the vehicles or some of the other vehicles decks. But just getting your set of vehicles is going to be absolutely terrific. I like to think of vehicles as a package, because most of the vehicles decks, whether it is the red-black vehicles, the Mardu vehicles, or the mono-black vehicles, they all run this package of 4 Scrap Heap Scroungers, 4 Heart of Kierans, and 2 Aether Sphere Harvesters. And if we look over here in the sideboard, we will find our other copy of Aether Sphere Harvester. So they did give us the full package that we can build around here. Now the rest is just good removal, and the sideboard's no different. We do have good removal here in the sideboard. A couple Harsh Mentors for those matchups where people will be activating things. Duress, because we don't have counter. Duress is a really good card. Chandra's Defeat, a couple Magma Sprays for the the mirror or anything else that might have Scrap Heap Scroungers or Earthshaker Kenras or something. Crook for the Scarab God, things like that. Just absolute good answers for everything, and the vehicle package in this deck is complete. I'm going to say that the vehicle package in this deck is complete. You got 4 Heart of Kirin, you have your 4 Scrap Heap Scroungers, and you have 2 Aether Sphere Harvesters. That is a complete package. Now, most of the time, those are run with 3 to 4 copies of Aether Hub. So, again, you do have the full package. We also have the Pia Nalars. Like, there's just so much value here in this deck that I almost can't wait to get into running a league with this one. I just don't think we'll have to upgrade a lot. And if you really didn't want to upgrade the land, I actually think that this land will work for you. Now, there's going to be times where you might not be able to cast your Unlicensed Disintegration on curve, but if you'll notice, most of the deck is either colorless or everything's a dwarf. So the only creature in the deck that's not a dwarf is Pia Nalar. Everything else is a dwarf. You've got Depala, she's a dwarf. You've got Veteran Motorist, and you've got Toolcraft Exemplar. So all of those are dwarves, and you can cast all of those with this or a single red. And we do have a fair number of ways to make red, so that's not a real problem. But yeah, if you wanted to upgrade, you would probably start taking these out and putting the split lands in those places. But again, we will talk more about upgrades when we actually run the deck. So that's the vehicle deck. We've covered the Surge deck, and we've covered the red deck. Next is the control deck. Now, I really wish this would have been like blue-black control or something, and a lot of people are like, oh no, Wizards, why did you have to make approach accessible to everyone? Well, I'm kind of glad they did, because the deck is very good, and we have not been seeing it much here in Rivals of Ixalan, but the deck is very sound. Now, this is also a competitive deck. I don't think you would have to upgrade this deck much. Yes, you would want to find some room to slip in a couple more Settle the Wreckage. You might want to shave back on a cast out or two and see if you can get an Ixalan's Binding in the deck. Some people like farm to market. I'm not a huge fan of farm to market. Some people like Failure to Comply or something like that. And it just depends on what your meta is, on what shift you would make. I don't necessarily know if I would like Opt in the deck or Hieroglyphic Illumination over Glimmer of Genius. I do know that I'd want to fit in some Search for Azkantas in the deck. And but for the most part, the deck has all the tools you need: 4 Glimmers, 4 Supreme Wills, 4 Sensors, 4 Opt, 4 Aether Meltdowns. So you can really churn through your deck after you cast that first approach. You can gain a little bit of life here to help get to that. And then if you don't have the approach win, you can just throw Kefnet down in a control mirror, and if they can't remove the Kefnet, then you're just going to start cracking in every turn for 5. And it's amazing how much work can get done with Kefnet if your opponent can't deal with it. So that's pretty good. I like a turn 3 Kefnet, especially if you don't have to expend anything else and you don't have to dig for your lands and stuff. So you can keep 7 cards in hand and just start doing work with Kefnet. And remember, you may return a land you control to its owner's hand. So you can draw a card, and then you get to choose whether or not you want to return that land. So draw a card, then you may return a land. So there's options there to fill your hand back up and put 2 cards per turn in your hand for 4 mana, even though one of them is your land. But pretty cool. I like Kefnet there. We do get 4 copies of Irrigated Farmland. Now, there's no Glacial Fortress, and there's only 2 Ipnu Rivulets in the deck. So, I'm a little on the fence about that. Again, I think that there should have been at least 1 Glacial Fortress in the deck. And I think that they could have come off of a couple more Ipnu Rivulets to just make this smooth. But for the most part, I'm happy that we got, Field of Ruins, and we got the Irrigated Farmlands, and a couple copies of Ipnu, because Ipnu is one of the most commonly used because of these approach decks. I mean, if Near Dead Lands gets a lot of use, and there's a lot of white decks floating around, so the deserts get a lot of play. I just really like the imp music, especially in these approach lists, because, you know, milling yourself is a thing. Now, in the sideboard, we've just got a lot of answers to everything. We've got a little bit of, you know, life gain here in Renewed Faith. We've got 4 Regal Caracols. 4 cats here, people. Now, again, the Glyph Keepers, that's one of those cards where, you know, this is kind of, you know, a budget option, but it is still a good control finisher, and, you know, it does counter the first spell or ability, you know, that's targeting it. So that's pretty cool. It is hard to remove it, and, you know, you can bring it back from the graveyard. I like the card. I personally think that this version of the deck you could easily shift into a cycling deck, or you could easily, you know, shift into, you know, the standard approach list. So I like that, and I like what this deck has to offer. 4 negates, you know, 2 spell pierce. We got some counter against, you know, control matchups, and, you know, we've got life gain against the aggro matchups, and you know, the main board is just kind of set up to just kind of answer everything. So you know, a good control player should be able to at least go, you know, 3 or 2 with this. Whether I'm going to be able to go 3 or 2 with it is a whole nother story. But, you know, a good control player should be able to do something with this. It has most of the elements you would want. I would like some disallows, maybe some Torrential Gearhulks in the sideboard over the Glyph Keepers. But, again, Glyph Keeper is not a bad card, and pretty much every card in this deck has a good place. There's just a few cards I would like to see, you know, upgraded to make this a little bit more competitive. But, hey, that's what we've got. All right, guys, let's do the wrap up here. And you know, I think the decks are great. Again, I'm going to say it one more time. Thank you, Wizards. I'm going to say thank you to my subscribers. And you know, if you're not a subscriber, make sure you do hit that subscribe button, subscribe to the channel, hit that thumbs up button so more people get to see the content. And I'm going to be running these in a league this week. You don't want to miss it. You want to be there live. You know, help me miss those punts. Help me get through here, and we'll see just how powerful these decks are. How much do they need to be upgraded? Can we just do good things with these decks without upgrading them? Well, we'll find out this week. So hit that notification button beside the subscribe, and we'll see you later this week. Man, I always have fun. I hope you guys have fun. We'll see you next time here on Sideboard MTG.